disconnected.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the channel on the Honda CRF300L. It's time for the oil change. I actually thought I had done an oil change video on my CRF250Ls, but evidently I never did. I looked and I couldn't find one, so we're going to do it on the CRF300L. Now, if you have a CRF250L, it will be exactly the same. I'm actually doing an oil filter change. Then I'm going to check the air filter. If the air filter needs changed, I'm going to replace it too. As far as the oil filter change, the filter and everything is the same on the CRF250L as it is the CRF300L. Now, the air filter may look about the same, but the air filter for the CRF300L is different. If you want to see this part number for the air filter for the Honda CRF300L, that's it right there. The oil that I run, I always use the Honda GN4 10W30. I buy it by the gallon. It's just always what I run on my bikes, and it seems to do good. And then on my oil filters, I always run the factory OEM Honda oil filter. So this is the oil filter for the CRF300L and CRF250L. So the first thing we're going to do is get a pan under here, drain the oil. What you're going to need for that is a 12mm socket and a ratchet. And you're going to need a 8mm socket and a ratchet for your oil filter cap. And this will be the drain bolt. I may have to have an extension on here instead of just this shorty, but we'll go ahead and put the pan in here and get the oil drained, and then we can take the oil filter cap off. And what I do is I change my oil on 300 mile, the first change, and then my second change, I change it at 3,000 miles. In the book, it does say every 8,000 miles. It says 600 miles for your first change, and then 8,000 miles after that, every 8,000 miles on your oil change. But oil's cheap, and I like to keep good oil on the bike, so I go ahead and change mine every 3,000 miles. It always seems to work out good. I use a big drain pan to drain my oil, and the reason why is because I want it to be able to drain the oil while I remove this cap, so I want the pan big enough so when the oil is coming out the bottom here draining, I can still take this cap and change my oil filter at the same time without making a mess or having two pans. So the oil drain plug is located right under here. I have an AXP skid plate, and there's actually a hole where I can get to it. Some skid plates do not have a hole, or it's in the wrong location, and you may not even have a skid plate if you're just from the factory. But there's a 12mm head bolt right here, which is your oil drain. So I take it loose, and I take just the extension of the socket and pull it out. I'm not a glove wearer. Some people wear gloves, but I never have wore gloves. And just like that, and get the oil to draining. While I'm at it, I inspect this bolt to make sure that there is no metal shavings or anything on it, which don't look like there is. And you can actually buy a magnetic bolt to catch any, just in case. I actually don't use them, but that's your preference. So I clean the bolt off, lay it down, we'll go ahead and change the oil filter. So the oil filter cover is located on the right side of your engine, and it has 4 bolts in it. They are 8mm head. And what I do is, to keep the mess down, is I take some paper towels, or you can take a shop towel, either one, and I put them down in here below it. And this will keep a lot of that oil from running down in under my skid plate and under my frame. It may not stop it all, but it will stop some of it. So I go ahead and loosen all these bolts one at a time. And then I'll go ahead and remove all the bolts. If you're doing this outside, you want to be sure not to drop these bolts in the dirt. If you do drop them in the dirt and gravel, you definitely want to clean them off before you replace them. So when you remove this cover, there's a spring inside here. You don't want to drop the spring down inside your oil pan, or you'll have to fish it out. And there's also a gasket that you don't want to drop off of here down into your oil pan. So if you remove this, you can see right here there's a spring inside this, and you want to make sure that spring stays inside here. You can look in here and inspect and see if you see any debris in here. This one looks really clean. There's no metal shavings or any kind of dirt, so it looks real good. And I actually do not wipe all that oil off. I actually leave this wet as long as it's clean. If it's not clean, you want to wipe it off and clean it up. Notice whenever you take out the oil filter, the way it's located, you can see that there's no rubber gasket here. It's just metal. And it even tells you on here which way it goes. So when you pull this out, be careful not to drop your gasket. And you can replace this gasket every time. A lot of people do. I don't. I actually hardly ever replace this gasket. They last years and years. As long as you get your bolts tightened, snug down right, they should last a long time. And this is the oil filter. The other side of it, you can see the gasket here that I was talking about. So when you replace the new oil filter and put it on here, you want to make sure that this rubber part goes in onto this little grommet right here and make sure it seats good, sits right on there. I do take and wipe out any oil, just soak it up with a paper towel out of the inside of this cavity right here, and then make sure that my surface is clean. I want to make sure that when I put this back on, there's not going to be any dirt or debris that gets in here. So we'll take our new oil filter with the rubber side going in. This is the most crucial part. I have seen when I worked on motorcycles, people that had put these on backwards, and if you put this on backwards, it will burn your motor up because your oil cannot pump through the filter and circulate in your engine, and it will burn it up, and it won't take very long to do it. When you're putting your cover back on, be sure that your spring is inside and sitting in there. Then I take my gasket, lay it on here, make sure it's in the right location. You can flip it over either way, but there is only one way that it goes. You can see the shape here. Make sure that you get it in the right direction. And what I do is I take a bolt and another bolt, and I put them on there just to hold my gasket in place while I put this back on. Get you a couple bolts started. And then one thing to do before you tighten the bolts down is what I do is I take and push on this and make sure that you can see that it springs in and out nice and flat. And this is to make sure that your spring has not fell over and that it is positioned right if it will spring in and out like that. So then what I do is I hold this in while I crank my bolts in and get them snug down finger tight. Now when I tighten these back up, you can take and look up the torque and torque them if you want, but be very careful. Sometimes depending on the torque wrench you got, you can set it at the right torque, and trying to torque them, you can snap these off. You don't want to snap one of these off inside your engine. I always just hand tighten them. I know I've done enough of them, pretty much how to get them hand tight and correct. So I just hand tighten them down, and the same thing I do on my oil drain plug. I just actually hand tighten it down. Now these don't have to be very tight. Now we can remove my paper towel, clean up any excess oil that I have here, which is not too bad because I put the paper towel here. I like to wipe all the oil off, make sure it's not oily, because if you go in dusty conditions, all the dust is going to stick to all the oil. So I want to make sure that it's nice and clean the best I can. And you can even take the bike out and wash it if you want, make sure that all the oil's off. So now our oil is done draining. We can go ahead and replace the oil drain plug. All right, when you're replacing your oil drain plug, make sure that you don't have no debris up in here around where it goes, because you don't want to put any debris up into your engine. So just make sure your surface is real nice and clean. So when you're putting your drain plug back in, be sure that you have the aluminum crush washer on here. A lot of people will replace these every time also. I actually never replace them as long as they are not just damaged and tore all up. They seem to last a long time. But make sure that it didn't stick on the bottom of the engine and that you got it on here before you put this back up in there. And then when I tighten this is the same way. I don't use a torque wrench. You can look up the torque specs and torque it yourself if you want, but I know pretty much how tight I want it. I still have a little bit of oil here that has got on my skid plate, so it's dripping off. I may have to take this and wash it a little bit. I didn't think that much would get on there, but it did. So when that gets done dripping, I will take and wash it with some soap and water and clean it off real good. Okay, so now we're ready to put our engine oil in. This is the cap, the fill cap here we need to remove. Same way when you take this off, be careful because there's a rubber O-ring on here. And as always, you can replace that too. I don't replace these either unless they are damaged. I just clean all the dirt off. I also inspect the inlet hole here, make sure that it's clean and that I don't get no debris down in here when I put the oil in. Now on the side of the engine here, you have a lower and an upper mark. You're supposed to put your oil between the lower and upper mark. I like to put it to the upper mark, and then I will start the engine, let it circulate through the filter for just about 10 seconds, and then I will shut it off, let the oil settle back down, and then when I got it full, I want it just barely under the top mark, pretty much just touching the bottom of that top mark. These are the indicator marks I was talking about. This is the lower, this is the upper. So they say that you want your oil between the upper and the lower, and I like to have mine just under this upper mark. So touching the bottom of the upper mark is good after I have circulated some oil through the engine and shut it off, and then I fill it up to that mark. But make sure that you fill it up to that mark first, then start the engine, then shut it off, and refill it to that spot. Okay, so when you put your oil in, you want to make sure that you have a funnel that fits inside here nice and snug and that it won't fall out. And make sure that you take this funnel, clean it inside and out. Make sure it's very clean because you don't want no debris coming from your funnel into your engine. Also, the engine oil capacity of this bike is the same as the CRF250L, and it's, if you're just not changing the oil filter, if you're just changing the oil by draining it, it is 1.5 US quart or 1.4 liter. If you're changing the oil filter and the engine oil both, then it is 1.6 US quarts or 1.5 liter. And then of course if disassembly is a different thing, it's 1.9 US quart, 1.8. Can't believe there's that much difference, but I never go by how many quarts it takes. I always just go by these marks on the engine to get it right. So when you're filling this up, be careful not to pour too much oil. You don't want it running over the top of your funnel. So now I have my engine oil at the top mark. So now I want to start the engine. Before I start the engine, I want to go ahead and put the oil filler cap back on. So that's all it takes, is just a little bit just to circulate the oil through the engine, through all of the engine and through your oil filter. And now we can go ahead and check it, which it will be lower here, and we can fill it up and top it back off at that line. Okay, now I have my engine oil full. You can see that it's right at the bottom of this line, and that's where there's kind of a bubble there in the way, but it's actually right level with the bottom of this line. Okay, now that that's all done, I can go ahead and put my oil filler cap back on, and my oil change is complete. Now we'll go ahead and check our air filter. Okay, so whenever you want to get to your air filter, you can take the seat off. I usually don't because I can reach up in here. There's a push peg right here on top. I take a screwdriver, a flat screwdriver, and I pop that push peg up, and then I remove this Allen bolt right here on the side, take the side cover off so we can get to our air filter box. So on our air filter box here, we have 5 screws that we need to remove, and they are, of course, Phillips. After you remove the 5 screws, this cover should just pull right off, so you want to inspect it, make sure there's no dirt. You want to wipe the dust out of this also. And then this is our air filter element. You can see these little tabs right here. You pull out on these and your air filter will come right out. So if you look at the air filter on mine, it's actually pretty dirty, so I'm going to go ahead and change this. I've rode a lot of dusty roads, and when you're following Harry, he'll always dust you out. He can't slow down. So I'm going to go ahead and change this air filter and make sure I got a good one. You can take, some people do, and blow these air filters out. It will help some. If you do blow them out, you want to blow them from this side. Never blow air into this side. You can kind of get some of the dirt out of it, but not all of it. So I'm going to go ahead and replace this filter. Okay, so before I replace the filter, I always want to take and wipe the dirt out of the inside of here. Even though the dirt from inside this air box is not what goes through the filter, anything on this side of this lip here is what goes into the intake and into the fuel injection. So we want to go ahead and just wipe the dirt out of it anyway, being careful not to get any dirt or debris inside this intake boot, just to make sure it's tidied up and clean again, just like new. So now we're going to take our new filter, which you can see it's a lot cleaner, of course, than the old one. And we want to turn it just like this. The CRF250L is going to be similar, but as I said, this is not the same filter on the 300L as it is the CRF250L. So you need to purchase a different filter for that. I'll put links below in the description. What you want to do is make sure when you put this in that this side here goes into some little notches in the back side. So make sure they are in the notches by pulling out on it, and that they're seated in the notches, and then this foam gasket will seal when you snap this into place. So like that, I can feel that I went into the notches there, and my back side of it's not moving out. I can kind of try. It's not moving out, so I'm ready to snap this on. like so. So now we can go ahead and put our cover back on here. We can put our side cover back on, and we are done changing the oil filter, and the air filter. All right, guys, thanks for watching. That is the oil filter change, and air filter change for the Honda CRF300L. And as I said, this is also the same method you would use on a Honda CRF250L. Thank you guys for watching. Click the thumbs up. Check out the links in the description below, and I'll catch you on the next one. Right on.